Hello and welcome back to the channel. From the title you probably guessed that it's not going to be a build video rather than a review of this airbrush from Gaahleri, which is the GHAD-39. Now you probably heard of this brand Gaahleri from many other content creators here on YouTube. They've been doing all these promotional stuff with others for more than a year now, maybe 2 years perhaps, and they reached out to me whether if I want to have a go at one of their airbrushes, and I said yes because I really want to have a look at what the current market holds, and I'm always up for something new. First, we are going to have a look at what comes in the box, what extras do they give, and afterwards then we are going to do a bit of comparison between this and my expensive Harder-Stein bag and my really cheap no-name one from Amazon. And then we are going to have a look how I used this airbrush to paint up one of my projects that I'm currently building. First things first, I should mention that I quite like how nicely this airbrush was packaged. It comes with this sleeve, and then you have this nice cardboard box which has a nice diagram of all the parts that you have of this airbrush, which can be really helpful not just to learn what each part is named, but if you lose anything or it gets broken or something happens to it, Gaahleri has a really good support on that one, and you can buy replacement parts directly from their website. And I think that's an amazing thing because God knows small tiny O-rings can get lost forever, eaten by the carpet monster. Needles can get bent, nozzles can break, all these things can happen, and yeah, it's always nice to be able to buy replacement parts and actually know what you want to buy. Then you have this thank you note, and well, there is not much of an airbrush because I've been using it. As I said, I use it one of my projects, and here it is. I use the smaller cup, but if it's not big enough, which it was for me actually, you also have an extra cup here which is roughly twice as big, like a small shiny egg, and then you have some extra nozzle and needle, which is a 0.5mm one. The airbrush comes with a 0.35 one installed already. For me, I would prefer a 0.2 and a 0.4, but I think a 0.35 can do a decent job with most of the things, except maybe very fine detail. Anyway, let's have a look what else is there. And then you have some replacement O-rings. You have rubber ones and Teflon ones, and lastly you get some lube. Now I don't know if it's silicone based or something else. I personally I don't think I'm going to use this. I have a water-based one from Badger, and because I'm using water-based acrylics, I wouldn't want to potentially contaminate the paint with silicone based stuff. And that's about it really. Now let's do just a quick comparison. Okay, so it's comparison time. Let's have a look at what GHAD-39 from Gaahleri has to offer that really distinguishes it from the cheap no-name airbrushes that you can get on Amazon, and brings it closer to what you would get with Harder-Stein airbrushes. So let's talk about these features that would set it apart. And first off, as we mentioned before, replaceable cup. That's usually not the case with the very cheap ones like this. As you can see, that's fixed. You cannot replace it, whereas this can. Also, another mention that the seal underneath the cup is made out of Teflon, the same as the Infinity CR Plus or other harder and Steenbeck's airbrushes. And then you have the nozzle, which is an easily removable, replaceable nozzle system, very similar what Harder and Steenbeck does. It's a bit on the smaller side, but we are going to look into that more further. And then that also has a Teflon seal, same as the Harder and Steenbeck. I also removed previously the needle guide that sits within, and that also has Teflon O-rings in it, same as Harder and Steenbeck. So there is a lot of similarity in all the right places to a more premium airbrush compared to this cheap one. Although in look and feel you can see that it really resembles more the cheap one, but I can assure you, well, of course I can't show it to you on camera because I don't have a microscope, but so you have to take my word for it, but I can assure you that the feel of this airbrush is much nicer than the feel of this one, because it has a lot of rough edges, textures around here on the cutout and here as well. So overall speaking, this is still a much nicer, well-produced airbrush compared to this. And given the price difference between these two and these two, this is really gives a lot more extra, especially when you are a newcomer to paintwork with airbrush. I think it's a good starter to get one of these Gaahleri ones, because you get similar features to what you would get from a Harder and Steenbeck. So it can be a good jumping board to see whether you even like to do things with an airbrush or not, and just get a feel for it. Now let's have a closer look with the nozzles. So first let's have a look at the cheap no-name one from Amazon. And here we are. The nozzle is, as you see, a little tiny nozzle which is threaded, so you have to screw it in, and I used beeswax as a seal around it. Now the problem with these ones are that they are really tiny, really hard to clean when it is full of dried paint and other gunk, and they are really delicate. If you over tighten them, you can break them, and the reason why I know that, because I did it a couple of times. And now let's see what Gaahleri has. And as you can see, it's not a threaded nozzle. It has a Teflon O-ring, as I said, and it has these grooves that apparently can help with airflow direction. Now, I am not a scientist, so I don't know how much it really helps or not. And then it sits in there. Now I will try to be very delicate. I should have taken out the needles. Don't do this at home, kids. So it sits in there, and then this goes on the top, and you just screw it back in, and it's all done. So much easier, so much more simple. It is very similar to what you have with the Harder and Steenbeck. Again, don't do this at home, kids. First, always take out the needle. But this is the Harder and Steenbeck one. You can see that it's bigger, much bigger than the Gaahleri one, but the concept is the same. Again, this has Teflon as well, but that's neither here or there. We aren't talking about this, but we are talking about the Gaahleri Airbrush, and it's just a demonstration to show that it has the same kind of features than this. I think now we covered all the major parts. Now let's have a look how it performs when I'm using it in its more natural habitat, which is the spray booth. First off, let's test the airbrush out with some non-peel surface primer from VMS. I am using the 0.35mm nozzle. This primer is ready to apply directly from the bottle. They do say that you can use a small nozzle like 0.2mm as well, and because of that, this 0.35mm nozzle should be more than good enough for this job. And it actually did perform really well, but this is not a huge task that couldn't be done with this airbrush. So the flow was nice, everything went on evenly, there was very little amount of sputtering and any other problems really. So far I was really happy how the airbrush performed. And of course, yes, you might have guessed, this is a Spitfire Mark 5B from Airfix in 1/48 scale, which is still in development, and there should be a video dropping soon enough how it looks, so take it as a bit of a preview. But let's continue talking about the performance of the airbrush. Again, there was no problem doing the priming. Although because it's a water-based primer, there was some amount of tip dry as usual with water-based acrylics. And this is the end result, a nice even coat of this gray surface primer. Now we're going to get into a more interesting territory. Using black from AK Virgin Acrylics, we are going to do some pre-shading, or otherwise known the panel line highlighting. And I tried to do just relatively thin lines, although here you don't have to be like very perfectionist, you know, so you don't need any good straight lines or anything. It can be, you know, a bit of a slapped on thing, and it can go a bit thick because everything will be covered up, and we really just want to have it as a pre-shading to accentuate the different panels that the plane surface is made out of. And yet again, the brush didn't have any problems whatsoever doing this task. Tip dry, of course, during this phase was a common thing, but as I said before, this is really not the brush's fault. And of course, compared to the primer phase, here I used a more diluted paint and low PSI for this work, and it didn't change in any shape or form the performance of the brush, which I guess it's a good thing. Now here is the end result. I know it's fugly, but it's not going to be that visible. It's going to nicely blend in with the top coat paints that are going to go on top of this one. So let's go ahead and do that right now with some RAF medium sea gray from AK Interactive again. This is going to be a very similar job compared to priming, as I am going to do just a main brush over the surface. So no fancy close-up stuff, just medium PSI and just doing a lot of light layers to slowly cover up everything. And here as well, the brush performed as expected and I had no problems whatsoever. And just as a side note, as I have been using this airbrush, I did notice that the trigger is a bit more stiffer than my harder and steam back one. But of course, this is more of a personal issue than the brush's issue, because it's a brand new airbrush and I've been using the Infinity CR Plus for quite some time now, so it's pretty much second nature at this point. whilst this being a brand new one, it takes some time for me to get accustomed with it. But of course we can say the same thing literally with everything that we use on a daily basis, be it a new mobile phone, be it a new car, or be it, I don't know, a new partner perhaps. You know, everything that is new in your life, you have to get used to it. And here is the end result. I think it looks quite convincing. A lot of the shading is still very much visible and really gives more texture to the panels themselves. Now let's move on to the next step, which is doing the two-tone camo scheme. First using RAF Ocean Grey, because that's the lighter color, and then going over the rest with the RAF Dark Green. Both of them of course from AK Interactive 3rd generation acrylics. And this is the real deal, the real test to see how good it is going to be with a 0.35mm nozzle doing fine brushwork, because I am going to freehand all the camo. Now some of you might point out, and rightfully so, that freehanding an RAF camo scheme is going to be not authentic with the real thing, as those were more hard edge camos, and when you freehand you are going to end up with soft transitions between the colors. But this is my plane, my project, so I do as I please, and I like to do freehand camos. And of course I wanted to see how well this airbrush performs doing such fine detail where you want to outline the camouflage with some really fine lines and then doing some mottling and slowly building up the opacity of the paint, having a bit of tonal variation whilst you're doing that. The airbrush performed as expected. I was happy with the result, and I think you can see that, yeah, it works as it should. Now the question is whether I would use it for a smaller model, like for example if the Spitfire would have been in 1/72nd scale. I think the 0.35mm nozzle is a tad too big for very fine detail on such scale. For bigger ones like this 1/48, or depending on the subject, for example, if it's a 1/72nd scale bomber, I think you are going to be okay, especially when you're doing hard edge camouflage or something, so you are actually using masks to mask it off the different parts of the camo scheme. Then yes, this will be more than enough for you. It is going to do all the job that you need to do. So let's see how the whole thing turned out, and I'm quite happy with the result. It's not my best work, but for me, I think it's going to be good enough. And after this, I went ahead and masked off this identification band, I think, and I did it with RAF Sky Gray. Interestingly enough, this wasn't provided by Airfix as a decal. Usually you would get these decals from them, but no, this one was nowhere to be seen. It was just said that you should paint this, and of course I would rather paint such thing, but again, I found it interesting not to have it. And after all the painting has been done, let's seal the deal with some satin varnish from VMS. And here as well, I go full blast and just give a nice thick one coat all around the plane. And of course, there were no problems whatsoever. The airbrush performed as it should, and it was really easy to do all the coverage. And I think this concludes our little test to see how well we can do a whole Spitfire paint job with this airbrush, from priming to pre-shading, and then a two-tone camouflage, and then doing some masking as well, and now with the last step, sealing it in with some satin varnish, I think everything has been covered. Of course, all these are water-based acrylics, so I haven't tested it yet with enamels and lacquers, but I can safely say that probably it will perform the same way. So I'm going to pass the microphone back to past me and wrap the whole thing up. Well, thank you very much, future me. Now let's have a look at the final result in a bit better lighting condition. Now ignore that the plane is not fully done yet, but just enjoy the visuals of the paint job. And it looks okay. Now some of the parts aren't that nice, like this should be more of a circular thing, but that's really not the airbrush's fault, it's my fault not being good enough. Apart from that, I think the overall result is speaking for itself. So what's the verdict then? The verdict is that this is a really good beginner-friendly airbrush which has a lot of good features which you would find in more premium ones. You know, the easily removable nozzle, the Teflon seals in all the right places, the removable cup. All these things really add up, and it is a really good airbrush for anyone who wants to get into airbrushing and don't want to break the bank. And I would have loved to have one of these when I started off doing airbrushing a couple of years back, and I was just throwing money at the wall, buying cheap ones from Amazon left and right, and just had a bad time until I ended up buying a harder and Steenbeck. Two things that I would like to mention here though. So Gaahleri, if you're watching, please listen carefully. One is that I had a look on the Gaahleri website whether they provide 0.2mm nozzles for this particular type of airbrush, and sadly they don't. I think they should, because it's a really good airbrush and it would be nice to have all the range for the nozzles from 0.2 up to 0.5. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, that right off the bat I did feel like that the needle needed some polish. The surface was a bit rough to my taste, so I used this metal polish. Probably any kind of polishing compound would do, but I used specifically this one to polish up the needle, because a nice smooth polished needle will prevent the paint from sticking and drying to it. It does help paint flow. So a polished needle is a must-have. Probably you want to polish your needles every once in a while, depending how many times you use your airbrush on a daily basis, but yeah, that's what I had to do at the very beginning. I think that concludes everything that I wanted to say about this airbrush. If you're interested in one of these, then please follow the links in the description below. And I have joined Gaahleri's affiliate program, so it doesn't just help them out, it does help me out a bit as well. So I hope that this video was helpful enough to make you decide whether you need one of these or not. And in the meantime, stay safe, happy modeling, and see you on the next one. Bye bye.